She had it all: fame, beauty, and a front-row seat to fashion's most exclusive circle. She was McQueen's muse, Moss's best friend, and a supermodel in her own right. But behind the glamour was addiction, trauma, and a slow, painful self-destruction the world never saw coming.
And he would push them, and he would bring out the best in them, be it Philip Tracy or Sean Lean, and I think with Annabelle it was similar. He took her talent of writing, harnessed it, and it became another thread to this wonderful.
Before the runways, before the drugs, before the headlines, there was a quiet girl from West London, drowning in silence. Annabelle Neilson was born on March 31st, 1969, into a world of quiet privilege. Her father was a wealthy property advisor, her mother, an interior designer with a sharp eye and high standards. From the outside, it looked like the perfect life: private schools, posh homes, every opportunity money could buy. But Annabelle would later describe her childhood as emotionally cold and unstable. She battled severe dyslexia, hated school, and struggled to fit into the elite spaces she was born into. By 16, she wasn't chasing dreams, she was chasing a high. That's when heroin entered her life. Not at parties, not in modeling, but in her teens, long before the cameras ever found her. The destruction had already begun.
A typical day for me is working on different projects. I mean, I have 4 or 5 projects on the go at the moment.
Annabelle Neilson didn't dream of runways or photo shoots. She didn't chase fame. In fact, for a while, she was running from everything. At just 16, after a violent assault left her deeply traumatized, she fled to Australia, alone, angry, and already in the grip of a heroin addiction that was quietly consuming her. She spent years in the shadows, lost, addicted, barely hanging on. But after returning to London, something changed. She got clean, not overnight, not easily, but she clawed her way out. And somewhere in that recovery, the world finally noticed her.
I want one of you like that.
She had that kind of beauty you don't forget. Striking, intense, slightly dangerous. She wasn't the polished blonde or the smiling cover girl. She was raw, edgy, magnetic. The kind of look designers died for in the 1990s. And then came Alexander McQueen. They met at a party, and it wasn't just a meeting, it was a collision. He saw in her something no one else had. She wasn't just his friend, she became his muse, his emotional twin, the woman he said he could share everything with.
He did it on me.
Did he do it his?
Yeah, he did it on me too.
Were you frightened?
I actually, thankfully it was loose at the bottom, so I wasn't. But he just went, right, it's far too long. Bah, 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 bah.
He once called her the only person who truly understood him. From there, everything exploded. She walked in his shows, partied with Kate Moss, and slipped into the tightest circle of London's fashion elite. Annabelle didn't just enter modeling, she crashed into it like a storm. But the past never really let her go. And neither did the drugs.
I am not somebody who turns up to an opening of an envelope, because if I did, I would literally be out every night, and I'd probably have to go to 3 or 4 events every night.
The 1990s fashion world didn't just blur the lines between work and play, it erased them completely. Glamour on the surface, chaos underneath. And Annabelle Neilson was in the eye of the storm. She wasn't just attending the parties, she was part of the inner circle that defined them. Wild nights with Kate Moss, endless after-hours with McQueen, London, Paris, New York. It was fast, it was famous, and it was always drug-fueled.
So the most important thing to me is actually my friendships and the people who I'm closest to.
In that world, heroin wasn't a scandal, it was an accessory. Cocaine flowed like champagne. Pills were passed around like breath mints. For Annabelle, who had already struggled with addiction in her teens, it wasn't a new world. It was a familiar trap. She spiraled. Behind the designer gowns and flawless photos, she was fighting a brutal war with herself. She self-harmed. she battled depression, and she spoke about it later with brutal honesty. Then came the horse accident. A ride gone wrong left her in a coma for days. Broken back, broken pelvis, months in recovery. But the worst scars weren't physical. That accident tore open everything she'd tried to bury. Her mental health collapsed. More hospital stays, more breakdowns. The drugs weren't a party anymore. They were surviving. They were silent. They were in control. But behind it all, she was disappearing.
Right, well done. Well done. Hi, Naomi.
Should we start that way then?
Yeah, you've done this before, haven't you?
That way, do that way.
In 1994, Annabelle did something the newspapers devoured. She married Nat Rothschild, heir to one of the richest banking dynasties in the world. On paper, it looked like a fairy tale. Aristocratic name, high society glamour, old money meeting modern beauty. But behind closed doors, it was a slow-motion disaster. The marriage lasted just 3 years, marked by fights, press speculation, and two people from wildly different worlds clashing behind the veil of wealth. When it ended in 1997, it ended badly, and quietly.
You know, going to a cocktail party. I've been to enough cocktail parties in my life.
But her real battles weren't in the headlines. They were internal. Annabelle struggled with PTSD from her teenage assault, depression, anxiety, self-harm. She once said she always felt on the outside, looking in. Even surrounded by fame and fashion, she was alone in her own head. And then something unexpected. She turned to writing. Not confessions or fashion memoirs, but children's books. A series called The Me's. Bright, imaginative, and tender. They weren't just stories, they were therapy. A way to speak to her inner child, to rewrite her pain with color and whimsy.
Arguments, fighting, and making up. It's a gang of girls who are going through the ups and downs of being on a reality TV show. You know, and also within that, their own personal journeys in life.
But the spotlight came calling again. In 2014, she joined the cast of Ladies of London, a Bravo reality show mixing glamour, gossip, and old-school British drama. Annabelle stood out, not just for her connections or fashion pedigree, but for her unpredictability. Sharp-tongued, emotional, often erratic. Viewers saw the cracks. What they didn't see was the weight she was carrying beneath the surface. Because while the cameras rolled, Annabelle Neilson was still fighting the same demons that had haunted her since 16. On July 12, 2018, Annabelle Neilson was found dead in her Chelsea townhouse. She was just 49. The official cause was a stroke, sudden, final, and quiet. But nothing about her life had ever been quiet. Though no foul play was suspected, those close to her believed she had relapsed before her death. The toxicology report was never made public, but the whispers were there, old habits still lingering. After a lifetime of battling trauma, addiction, and mental illness, it wasn't the drugs that took her, but the damage may have already been done. Her beauty, once so radiant and untouchable, had become a mask for years of pain and self-destruction. When the news of Annabelle Neilson's death broke, the tributes came fast, raw, heartfelt, and grieving. Kate Moss was shattered. Friends from Ladies of London mourned the loss of the show's most unpredictable, yet deeply sensitive soul. McQueen's old circle remembered the girl who once brought light into the darkest corners of his genius. But behind the glossy tributes was a truth far heavier than the headlines. Annabelle wasn't just a supermodel. She was a survivor of trauma, a woman who battled PTSD, addiction, and inner demons that never really let go. She was a muse who inspired brilliance, a writer who tried to turn pain into stories for children, a friend who loved deeply even while crumbling quietly. Her life is a haunting reminder of what happens when fame, beauty, and trauma collide. Annabelle was stunning, but that beauty came at a brutal cost. She didn't die because she was weak. She died carrying the weight of everything she was never allowed to let go. If you found this story as heartbreaking as it is important, subscribe for more untold truths behind the glamour. because behind every perfect photo, there's a price. If you've learned something new from Annabelle's story, hit like, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more eye-opening journeys like this.